So this piece, what I did is in the main lobby of MIT, it's the one you always see in the movies like Good Will Hunting and stuff. It's the giant dome, and there's all the huge balconies, and everyone's kind of rushing through the university through there. And this monitor hangs down from one of the balconies. And it's like this every single day. It's just black, and it says, "Today at the Institute," and it lists all of the information going on around the school. So I wanted to introduce my own information into that system, especially because MIT was like a very cold scientific place and there was no space for intimacy or sensuality. So I climbed up one night on top of a garbage can and I looked at the back of the TV and saw that it was just RCA in and out. And I ordered a spy. And I took the model numbers off the TV, and I ordered off spy.com a miniature surveillance camera, a sender and a transmitter and a receiver. And then I called Sony and I said, "Hi, this is the model of my TV. I can't find my remote control. Can you please send me one?" So they did. And when I got everything, I climbed up the next night and I put the transmitter in the back of the TV, and it's black, you can't see it. And basically, anytime I wanted, I could walk into the main space of the university and turn my remote control to the broadcast that I wanted. So I did a performance where I walked into the center of the lobby and I had a lipstick surveillance camera in my pocket, and I stood in the middle of that lobby, and in real time, I moved to the camera everywhere I could reach underneath my clothes for a half an hour. And during that time, it projected in real time onto the monitor, and that's me. And everything's wide for some reason right now, but that's me. And one by one, as people were walking through, people started noticing what was on the TV, and I couldn't see anybody. I was terrified, so I was just watching the monitor and moving the camera around. And as you probably know, because you're here and you probably know a bit about surveillance imagery, the camera is a wide angle lens, so you don't really know what you're seeing at first. So people would just stop, and I had people hiding in the balconies, filming everyone's reaction. So you just see people kind of like this, and then they'd realize and they'd move back. And what was really interesting to see in the video is how people just started going like this. Like everyone in there suddenly felt like maybe it was them. And because I made sure when I put the camera in my clothes, I would reach out so you'd see the space, and then it would dip back in, so you'd see skin, and then all of a sudden you'd see the dome and someone next to you, and then you'd see skin again. And so it was this really interesting interaction of how people were reacting. And so this cop was behind me to the side and was watching at the end, and of course I didn't know he was there. And towards the end, he had called the police station, and 8 cops had come in, and it just worked out that had been a half an hour, and I had reached every part of my body, and I put the camera in my pocket, zipped it up, turned off the TV, and walked out. And so he never figured out what happened or how it worked. So that was it, and I left all of the technology up there, so it's probably still there, actually. But it really did start me thinking about the relationship of myself and the police. And from then on, my work started actually working and using the police. So then I moved to Amsterdam, and I had a residency there, and Amsterdam is a really different situation than Boston in terms of repression, and Amsterdam isn't at all. So the ideas I was using of the body and surveillance and watching and performance just didn't really make sense in Amsterdam to me anymore. So I started noticing the surveillance cameras around the city instead, and started really thinking about cameras as icons of power. You probably all know that many of the cameras, at least originally, I think only 25% of the cameras in London actually worked. They were just decoys, and for people to maybe assume that they were working. So I started thinking about the camera, not the footage, but camera as representation. And is it a gargoyle, or does it really work? So I thought to kind of focus in on this thing of cameras being invisible, even though they're not, but they're beige, so supposedly you don't see them. So I climbed up this one pole of cameras, and I covered them with rhinestones, which are fake diamonds, basically. And then this was in front of the Rijksakademie, which is the studio building that I had my studio at. And it used to be a military building, so there's this giant fence. And so I covered the cameras, and I walked into the building, and the staff, one by one, kept coming up to me, and they're like, "When did you install the surveillance cameras?" And I was like, those cameras have been there for 7 years. All I did was stick jewels on them. And it really made me start realizing that people didn't notice the surveillance cameras. So then when I was biking around, I noticed that at the headquarters of police in Amsterdam, they have, this giant block building and these giant surveillance cameras on the facade. And so I thought, oh, that would be a great place to try this out. Like, I'll put rhinestones on those cameras and see, what the public reaction is. So I biked over and I walked in and I was like, "Hi, I'm an artist and I want to do a project with your surveillance cameras." And they were like, "We don't work with artists." So I left and I basically said to myself, okay, if you don't work with artists, then I won't be an artist. So I put on a suit and I made a company called System Azure Security Ornamentation. And I'm Jil Magid, CEO, System Azure Security Ornamentation Professional. And I made a portfolio of all the different models of glam cams that I could make. And I went back in 2 weeks later and I said that I was here from System Azure to discuss the relationship between surveillance, power, and public space. Could I please speak with the right person? So they sent me to the same guy who on the phone yelled at me that he didn't work with artists, and oddly he didn't remember my voice, which in Holland is kind of strange. And we had 6 months of meetings, and not only did they allow me at the end to cover their surveillance cameras with rhinestones, but they hired me and paid me to do it. So this is me in my rhinestone tool belt and my rhinestone jeans, covering the police cameras permanently with rhinestone encrusted surveillance rhinestones. And also to say the most interesting thing of the project was how many meetings I had with the police, and I just kept pushing it and they just kept taking it. And that was the weirdest thing. Like, I kept thinking it was gonna explode, and it wasn't. And so they were like, "Well, what color scheme are you gonna use?" And so, but it was really interesting. As much as I make it funny, the really interesting things about it is that what was so clear is how ambiguous their position was towards surveillance too. Like at first, the first few meetings were like, "Well, what if, we don't want people to see the cameras?" And I was like, "But your cameras are 3 times bigger than any other camera I've worked with before. What do you mean you don't want people to see them?" And they're like, "Well, we want the bad people to see them and the good people not to see them." Or like there were many things like this of like, who is it visible to, who is it not visible to? And basically I was like, well, also the thing is you have 9 surveillance cameras on the facade of your building and you're the headquarters of police. Like, how many people are going to be dumb enough to commit the crime in front of your building, So I was like, why don't you use them as what they are, as flags? And so they agreed to that, and these colors are from the internal police code, and they gave me them. So green is justice, red is full of love, blue is strength, and white is integrity. This is a close-up. And so the best part was when they said, we're thinking of doing all of the police stations. And I was like, how many cameras would that be? And they were like 47,000. I was like, I'll talk to my company about it. But so anyways, then they stopped working with me and they wouldn't meet with me again. And I found out that the different districts of police don't speak to each other. So then I hit the red light district with the full of love cameras. And that went as far as designing the posters, and then the board stopped that one too. So that was System Azure. And if you're interested in all of I made a website called System Azure, which is System, AZURE.com, and you can read every single one of the meetings that I had and all the letters between the police and the different authorities that I talked to. Because that was one of the hardest projects that I did, of how do you represent to people, like the cameras are kind of the fetish at the end, you could say, whereas the whole system and the relationships and the negotiations were really the interesting part. But like, how do you show that without being really didactic, or do you just be didactic? I think it's a really interesting questions with a lot of us who are working with like systems and the behind the scenes things. How do you put things out there and make it tangible in a way? How am I doing on time?